Right.
Right.
Like Dennis.
Okay.
Yeah. We're in the middle of everything. Mainly because of Sal's work.
Well,
She
you
mainly does.
I've always argued that that's why in Australia the more common address is G'day.
G'day, yeah. Because no one has any idea what time.
Some places not even morning tea time.
Now, in my presentation, in my intro piece, John, I said that we will provide an update on the activities of Australian sailing.
Oh, will I?
Focus on the importance of sailing and yacht clubs and growing education.
Yeah.
Sorry, he'll also discuss how to thought through that deep or not to change community mindset.
Good one.
We're going to announce the Australian challenge for the 36th American Cup.
Got a spare 80 million?
No problem. The government are going to give us
100?
Getting close, but not quite.
Is there any sense what the format's going to be again?
Yeah, my name is
September.
some of New Zealanders were connected for New Zealand and they were saying monohulls with foils. Yeah. The Volvo been mentioned in his presentation.
Volvo 60 with foil. Wow.
I'm quite sure there's been one foil.
No, I haven't seen that.
Even
No, I haven't seen the foil cover foil.
Even a tinny foil.
How do you get the speed?
Oh, I see.
No, it's just a motor.
Boy, how are you? How's the ferry business? I have. How's the fast ferries going? That's good. The old microfoil, is that? Yeah.
Cheers, mate. Give you a card. All the very best.
No doubt, no.
Yeah, gotcha.
The Wi-Fi in here is very bad.
Hey?
The Wi-Fi in here is very bad.
You want to turn it off or not?
No. Just I can't get it.
You don't want to turn it on? Get more brilliance up here?
No.
You don't?
No.
What's your resolution totals?
No, just the Wi-Fi connection is bad.
The what? The Wi-Fi? Oh, your totals. Sorry.
Yeah.
If you want them to dim the lights,
No.
you don't. Why not?
No, very short.
You get better resolution with your shot in the background. That's all. So you talk to shooting or you're shooting the footage.
I might kick off then. We're ready to go, so we stay the time. Welcome everybody. This session is the session for Australian sailing. And this session will run for 45 minutes and take us up to the lunch break. My name is Suzanne Davies. I'm from the Royal Prince Alfred Yacht Club, also known as Club Marina of the Year, as of last night, just to get that plug in. And it's my He's held senior roles in transport, tourism and government. He has extensive experience in sports administration, having previously been an Australian Sports Commissioner, as well as the CEO of two NRL clubs, the South Sydney Rabbitohs and the Sydney Roosters. You can boo or cheer as you wish. Before this, John held a number of senior leadership positions in the public and private sectors within New South Wales. John is now reconnecting with sailing, a sport he enjoyed when he grew up in the Shire. John was appointed CEO of Australian Sailing in May this year, and as many of you will know, Australian Sailing has a network of over 300 clubs, 350 clubs and 80,000 members, and about a quarter of a million Australians enjoying the sport each year. Today, John will provide us with an update on the activities of Australian Sailing. He will focus on the importance of sailing and yacht clubs in growing participation and the general interest in this sport and leisure activity. He will also discuss how sports are adapting or not to changing community demands and behaviours. So please join with me in welcoming John.
Experience in this sport, and in many ways I'm a novice or a beginner that we're all faced with. There's a famous, I think it was John Cotter wrote a book called Leading Change, and he was Google, Apple, a major corporation or a small business. And it's really just appreciating your past, knowing your history, knowing what's important to your organisation, your club, your family, understanding the genealogy, if you like, of where you come from. Also having a very, very simple but practical plan or vision. For Australian sailing, it is simply that, to advance sailing, to advance, to go forward, to be forward-looking to the future, but also successful organisations are aware of the present. And so when there are small milestones that are achieved, whether it's growth in a TACA's program, whether it's about launching new craft, literally, you know, in our sport, the NACRAs are out there in Europe at the moment and they're experimenting over in Europe, and we will see how they develop and how they master those new boats over time, and it's important that we recognise those milestones. I always do this sort of, it's nearly the pub test or the barbecue test about Australia Day. And I appreciate that people might be live streaming some of this, and I wouldn't want it to be repeated in the media, but I'm always shocked about how few Australians really know what Australia Day, how Australia Day started. A lot of people don't know that Arthur Phillip arrived on the 23rd of January, and he went to Botany Bay, and he found that there was no running water. So he got the first fleet, and he actually rode around the boat first, checked out that there was the tank stream and some running water, went back to the first fleet, and they sailed into Sydney Harbour on the 26th. And literally the rest is history. But what struck me is how few Australians know that Australia Day started with sailing. And for a lot of life, whether it's been commerce, sailing has been integral to many people globally around the world in how they live their life. So I think it's quite important to recognise, especially for Australians, like we're a penal colony, and I spent some time working in government, and when you live and work in Sydney, you realise that you are a product of your history, and the fights and the tribalism that happen around Sydney, whether it's north of the harbour or whether it's south of the harbour, people are very tribal in this city. And then you head south down to Melbourne and you find that the collective efforts tend to be a little bit more collegiate. And even the way that city was planned, a hamburger patty sort of grill with lots of ins and outs was well designed. And I've heard that in many ways the government cooperates a little bit better on that basis with the private sector. I don't know how to describe Queensland yet, other than it can be a little bit cyclonic at times.
State of origin.
Yeah, I've got a few Queenslanders here. They are superior in some areas, but again, they're used to dealing with, and unlike in sailing, literally the Bay Area having very strong clubs, Queensland, apart from Royal Queensland, which is probably the epicentre of sailing out of Queensland, it's more dispersed all the way up to the north, and with many race weeks coming up in the next couple of weeks, we'll get to see some of that as the migration. We tend to reflect on whether nostalgically the past was better than what the future might hold and how scary it might be. But I'll show a video in a moment, but 4 things are definitely true, and that is we there's actually a book at the moment called The Shallows. And The Shallows is a book about how this technological revolution is changing how our brain works and thinks. And our attention span has reduced by nearly 40% in 15 years, the average human attention span. A lot of people are finding it harder to read books, which was the source of education. And because of this absolute revolution in technology and information revolution coming at us, it is making us more time poor. And it also is leading, as people have learned about globalisation and the ability to literally red bullet and grow wings and fly, volunteering's on the decline. They're real things we all face. And young people are just big consumption addicts. They're thrill seekers. They want the adrenaline rush. They probably don't have the patience that we did as a generation growing up in the 60s and 70s had, where literally a stick and a ball would entertain us for hours upon hours. They've become accustomed to different types of stimuli, mainly through devices. That means that they're after a different type of thrill. But for also a lot of people, to have that intensity of life comes with how will you chill out. And people do that with cuisine, with dining out, and they're looking for other ways to flip the switch. That is all real. I suppose the other, when you look at some of the work done by the CSIRO and the Australian Sports Commission, it's fair to say that for the educated, undertaking physical activity for health reasons is more important than for competitive reasons. So where once people were driven to be the best, what we've seen is a genuine decline in the number of people competing in sports, but a huge increase in the number of people who participate in leisure sports for their own health benefits. Obviously, there's also a big area around adventure and alternative sports. You only have to look at the types of, I know they talk about the mammals, the middle-aged men in lycra, but you only have to get around to some of the park areas, the national parks, to see people who are involved in CrossFit, who are literally riding bikes in bushland, BMXs, etc. And they're wanting that exposure to something that is quite different, that is unique. Not constrained by rules, not constrained by officiating, but by their own rules that they might determine as they practice or try something. For me, it's a little bit alien, but I've got young kids and they're showing me that that's where they're heading, rather than conventional sport. I do want to spend a little bit of time talking about what some other sports are doing, and it's funny, having come from a combat sport, with literally billions of eyeballs per annum that focus on that sport. Even, a potential terrorist who wore a jersey is front page of the Sydney Daily paper today. Bulldog and a bomb was the headline. And those sorts of sports get headlines for all the wrong reasons, but it actually then, it nearly becomes like Kim Kardashian, as the speaker next door was talking about. It becomes the thing that consumes people. It's like we have a permanent voyeurism going on now in this modern world. But I do want to spend some time trying to look at a few light sports to sailing and doing a few comparisons of where they've done some good things or where we might need to think about for the future. A big point that, again, I'm only new to this role and I've spent some time engaging with a lot of our clubs where the heart of our sport is. And being better connected is, I think, a challenge for all of us. How do we connect skippers with crew, boats with potential sailors? It's the great challenge for all of us. It's not just word of mouth anymore, and how do we do that better is an important consideration for us. This is a short video it's about 4 minutes. I don't know if most of you have seen it. I am inclined to play it, but it is available also on the Australian Sports Commission's website. My 4 takeouts, and I'll quickly get to it, is about how do we think differently, and then at a local level, there's that old saying, all politics is local. So at a local level, how do you develop your coalition of the willing, your people that want to grow the sport and make a difference? How do we test those plans? What's working in other clubs of around the same size? Will it work for us, or are our geographic population, maybe that doesn't work for us? And then how do you trial it, and if it's working, how do you... And there are some real in their Discover Sailing, in TACA's programs, etc. Anyway, take this in, you might get one or two things to come from it.
All over Australia, strange things are happening at our sports clubs. The goalposts are shifting. Club membership is stagnating, and in an effort to more entertainment choices, more sports, and more demands on our time and our money. Our population is changing, and we have very different lifestyles. Yet, against this backdrop, there's been a spike in sports participation, not through clubs, but through things like running with your iPod, social group cycling, going to the gym, or seeing a personal trainer. So how do you, as a club, get a bigger slice of this increasingly fractured market? To find out what influences people's decisions around club-based sport, the Australian Sports Commission and GFK Blue Moon did some research with both adults and kids. With adults, we found most people fall into 10 basic groups when it comes to sport. The loyalists, the socially engaged, the sport-driven, and the apathetic clubbers. Then there's the sideline sportsters, the club-weary, the ponderers, the self-focused, the sport indifferent, and the sport atheists. 40% of non-club members aged 14 to 65 belong to a club at some point, so there's a chance to re-engage with these people on some level. And a quarter of Australians aged 14 to 65 who aren't members of a club have expressed interest in joining one. That's 3.8 million people who potentially want to be part of club sport. So how do you tap into them? Firstly, you need to understand the main concerns adults have with club-based sport. One is inflexible schedules, clubs being too cliquey, leaving people feeling excluded. Another is the cost, and limited opportunities for beginners. When it comes to kids in sport, the research identified 6 basic types: the social loyalists, the sports-driven, and the apathetic clubbers. And then you have the thrifty enthusiasts, the ponderers, and the sport-resistant. Over 50% of kids who aren't club members now were once part of an organised sport, and 46% would think about joining a club if activities were better suited to what they wanted. These non-club members make up one to attract and retain kids to your club and give everyone a chance to join in, regardless of ability. How can this research benefit you? Well, it might help you think outside the box to improve how your club operates. Be flexible. Cater to different groups by developing new ways to get people involved. Competition. Changing the rules might be one way of doing this. Let friends play together if that's important to them, rather than trying to separate them based on talent. Schedule your sport at different times of the day and week. Your presentation. Have a social night to celebrate participation and your volunteers, as much as you celebrate success. Ask your members about any issues at your club. By addressing the concerns, you can start to focus on the opportunities. Small changes now can make a big difference to your club.
I'm not sure. I found it interesting putting costs for our clubs. And I think coming up with different ways, I've even heard locally there's, instead of an 18-hole competition, there's now 3 6-hole competitions split up for some Sundays at that particular golf club. But again, it's always an opportunity cost between what is conventional, what is the history, and how you come up with the right sort of ways to actually make it interesting for potentially new entrants into your club and into your sport. When you break down the 2017 census for sailing in particular, looked at who were the regulars, if you like, who was having more than touch or a lot of exposure. So of the 250,000 people who generally sail each year, that group is split into 2 parts, and then if you, in a granular way, look at where it goes from there, yes, we have nearly 100,000 people who are actively involved in racing and regattas. They're the base. they're probably the most important component of our longevity and of our history. But just as important, when you look at the schools, the community, the Discover Sailing at that entry level, be it for kids or be it for adults, again, there's another 80,000 who are trying it. And I think the big test for all of us is, how do we take people from trying the sport, going out and being crew, having a good time, and then how do we get them coming back? And, you know, I'm not about to, as I said at the opening sentence, it's not for me as the new guy to dictate to people how is the best way to do it, but there are some really good examples already. I think at a recent meeting I quoted Sandringham, where they've been encouraging people to have a day sail. They then, you know, they've got a very affordable way in which they get people started, and then they try to convert them to a yearly membership after about 5 sails. Again, it's just one example. There are many different examples for each of you. For us, when we do the census, there appears to be, in terms of the trying, is where we've been growing, and that's where the 6% increase has come from the previous year. So especially around the TACAS program, it was a program with its genesis mainly out of Victoria, and then it has been extending with a national footprint, has seen some real growth, and we hope to grow that. I think we've got to, you know, as people have said, getting more women involved in our sport is important. It's been said 60 or maybe 100 times in the last year that women are the economic decision makers for young people. Gone are the days where the dominant male could leave the house at 8 o'clock on a Saturday and return for dinner. If that exists, you're nearing a dinosaur. If you can still do that, well done. But it is not what is really happening in the majority of households across the country. So getting women, onboarding them and getting them active, especially where there is all sorts of commentary around the contact sports and about the potential impacts to long-term health for some of the contact sports, we're in a beautiful position where we have a very safe sport, a very easy way to try our sport that we should also promote. I suppose there is also, we talk about the double-humped camel, for those of you who aren't that familiar with our sport, where we get a lot of people at the young age, up to about 15, to people literally, you know, hit adolescence and study and university and mid-40s, and they sail on for the rest of their life. That growth tends to stay there. I think it's our job to lift the two mountains as much as we can and just hope that the trough isn't as low. I think it's a risk to invest too much where there's so much distraction and literally the financial requirements of trying to live your life in those sort of early days of adulthood and then parenthood for those. If you like, the Formula One of our sport, the America's Cup, I think it's good for people who live in the industry and work in the industry to be able to observe some of that. Same with the Australian Olympic team. You know, Peter Condi, we have 100 people in that program. It's not something I'm dedicating a lot of my time to, even though I come from a high-performance background. It's great that we outperform nearly every other sport in terms of, you know, world champions, in terms of our Olympic effort. We need to invest in that, don't get me wrong. I think it's important that, and a lot of you sponsor individual athletes and great kids who come through. You know, they might be at the 29ers at the moment over at Long Beach, or they might be competing at the Worlds, and that's excellent. But that, to me, that's unlike some other sports where, say, in AFL, you have a player who becomes the role model, which is the reason the kid then starts Auskick. That's not something we aspire to. Ours is all local and it's at the club level. And that's why participation is important. Why have I put a mobile phone up here? I know there's connecting people is a really important thing, and I don't know how we get that right. That literally on your screen is a trial of a new app called Craft and Crew. A guy by the name of McAllister is trialling this app. At Australian Sailing, I think there's always a risk when you only back one horse. It's a bit like backing one class in terms of the development pathway for sailors. Yes, there are some good single-handed boats and double-handed boats in that sort of pathway up to Greenfleet, etc. But in the technology space, I think it's going to come to describe this, but it's sort of like rsvp.com. You want to match-make people. So you go right, but you know, if you're the skipper boat, but I think there's a great opportunity for to 2 years. Look, foiling, everyone's talking about foils. You know, they're the great thrill souls that will be foiling, you know, before Santa comes this year. Well, that'll be amazing. I'll be honest, I grew up, I fell in love with the America's Cup. There was Gretel right through to Australia too, and I find myself looking back at the 1970s, and I was really big on World Series cricket when some of my friends were traditionalists, and now I find myself more a traditionalist in terms of sailing rather than foils, because I see some of the foiling and I think it's pretty bloody scary. It's exciting and it's amazing, but some of the safety aspects really need to be thought through for our sport, especially for the non-foiling boats who are at the same start line as foiling boats. You know, I think that's important that we consider that. It's an obligation on all of us, especially for inexperienced young sailors who might be, you know, doing something like 20 knots, 25 knots. That's weaponry stuff. So I think we need to be aware of it. Yes, it's exciting. Yes, we've got to be absolutely a part of it. It is the future. And I'm literally just going to show you a clip straight out of Europe where Lisa literally sent this through. I hope it's going to work. With the new NACRA and what
I see you like the model, won't dance on that. I stand by and do that, you can play on that. Scoop around in the block with the baseball bat. You look at you done fresh with the cabin patch. Now leader of the pack, pack on the snatch.
But it's also this. It's also about leisure pursuit, about what I call it. I know, again, clubs are looking at different ways to syndicate or to get people to be involved in sailing that doesn't involve that sticker shock of having to literally purchase the boat. Some clubs have got a better balance sheet that they can make that offering at the moment, but I think that's definitely something we need to think about in the future. How we compete in a time-poor world, how do we structure some of the afternoon sailing events so they're not as long, so people who are time-poor can participate. Also, I talk about cost, there's competitions, there's the clock, the overall time requirements and being involved in the sport, and there's communications, how we communicate better with people to make sure that they're involved. Look, I know I've just got 5 minutes, and I'll put up, if you like, around 8 or 7 important things that we all need to consider. I think they're, especially for our Commodores and our GMs who are here, they're already things you're thinking about. It is ultimately there's a change. There is a change in the behaviour of the population, and we need to be aware of that. Whether it's they're less competitive and they're looking for a leisure sail, whether it's around how we engage people so we can actually have enough volunteers to stage some of our races. Is it a different way in which we've got to provide that learning? Should it be more online rather than conventional chalk and talk? There's an examination in terms of our own facilities. Are they the right facilities? How are we going, opening up the gates and encouraging people in? I'll never forget a famous man called Graham Pash. He was a Western Australian who ran as part of the racing industry. He had a lot to do with many sports, but he always said, how do you get the young people through the gate? And he was very big on trying to get the catchment within 5 kilometres of your own gates. And he said, you shouldn't make something free. There should always be some sort of way, a payment to enter. But once they get there, they should have a memorable time, not a forgettable time. And I'll always remember Graham's words for that. Questions around, gender, family, the different products we offer, and then how we engage more widely. We've got a lot of questions to ask. I find, look, as I said probably 3 or 4 times, I'm new to the sport. I'm seeing some wonderful work being done by many people across the country. We are living through a revolution. The technological revolution is real. I don't know where we'll land in about 10 to 15 years, but the condensation, whether it's in time or effort, is real, and we're going to have to make the necessary adjustments to that. So thank you very much for coming today and listening to me. I'm happy to take some questions.
Does anybody have any questions for John? Sean?
Yeah, sort of not quite a question, John. Great presentation.
I just want to encourage not quitting on the 15 to 35-year-olds. So your double hump model is dead right. That's where we are. I can't imagine any other sport not worrying about hanging on to their 15 to 35-year-olds. And there are ways, and we did such a great job in the leadership with the TACAS program and the junior program, and we build on that all across the country. I reckon if we really turn our heads to it, we can do some clever things, and we've heard a lot about share boat ownership and all sorts of things in that 15 to 35-year-old. I think it'd be a shame to quit on it. So
great. Can we just end our live streaming, if we don't mind, Jeff and Peter? When I was aged 22, I went to the Whitsundays and worked at Kentucky Whitsunday Resort, so I do get the 18 to 35s market. I did back then, and I suppose I came back from that realising what drives young people is the entertainment value. We all know that, right? And when I worked at the Sydney Turf Club, we introduced a thing called Girls' Day Out in November. It was the cheapest race day that we staged, and it was the most profitable race day that we staged. Why? Because girls love to dress up and come out and have a good time, and sure enough, a whole lot of guys follow as soon as they started to attend. And it exploded, the Girls' Day Out format. Then sponsors came on board wanting to support it. So I couldn't agree with you. It is important to hold our adolescents. I think the great test though is I wouldn't puddings, and I don't know about you, but when you get adolescent kids who then go out at night, they tend to sleep a lot during that Saturday after they've been out on the Friday night. It's a great challenge for us, but yes, I agree we shouldn't ignore it, but we do have two beautiful humps in the camel that we should also make sure we're stimulating. Yeah, a good question. Thanks, John. Yes?
Sorry, same club, John, but I take you to your last point that you're engaging with other sporting clubs. I think there's groups within our sport that we do need to be engaging with more. If you walk through the average marina and look at the percentage of boats that race and boats that don't race, that is the cruising elements of our clubs, those cruising elements far outweigh statistically and numerically our racing sailors. I think there's got to be an engagement with that group of people. I'm not saying RYA has the perfect model, but RYA has a broad church of engagement with all types of voting, and I think that we have to embrace that both within our clubs, which we attempt to do within our club, with strong cruising groups, but it has to be, I think, the leading edge of the sport as well, and our peak body needs to do it as well.
Yeah, no, I think, again, that's an excellent comment, and, you know, in visiting your asset to actually see windsurfers out there and kiteboarders out there, you're very fortunate that you've got that, I don't know if we're calling it East Beach yet, are we, but that area set aside as a launching pad for some of those other wind sports, I think is really important, and you've done that, but also it's a great challenge for all of us. How do we get people who really aren't into competition, who own a yacht, to then be involved?
But they have an interest in education, they have an interest in safety, they have an interest in destination.
Families want to learn sailing together.
Yeah.
And they're not in those humps.
Yes.
They're right in that spot that, I'm not going to ignore.
Yeah, no, good point, Sean. Yes, Peter.
The problem is you're not getting to the non-sailing public. During the 34th America's Cup, I had the rights to the America's Cup. I had 500,000 people across Australia watching that.